The algorithmic restructuring of the global economy is underway, and the white-collar middle class is officially on the chopping block. Welcome to the AI Unraveled Weekly Rundown. I am Etienne Noumen, software engineer from Université Laval, based in Calgary, Alberta. Today we perform a forensic autopsy on a week where the ruthless efficiency of technology violently collided with human reality. We begin with the great corporate purge. Meta is preparing to fire 8,000 employees next month, aggressively reallocating capital away from human salaries and into an applied AI division, building autonomous coding agents. Snap has already gutted 16% of its workforce. And in a terrifying new trend, failed startups are now selling the private, internal Slack messages of their former employees to train the next generation of AI models. Employee privacy has become liquid capital. Meanwhile, the geopolitical infrastructure war is escalating. Amazon just dropped $11.5 billion to buy satellite operator Globalstar, aiming to break Elon Musk's Starlink monopoly after a network outage paralyzed US Navy drones. In the boardroom, the AI bubble is cracking. OpenAI investors want to oust Sam Altman ahead of an IPO, while OpenAI's executives accuse Anthropic of faking $8 billion in cloud revenue. And hovering over all of this is a new Stanford report confirming that China has officially erased the US lead in artificial intelligence. Before we dive into the weekly data, a quick reminder. Subscribe to AI Unraveled on Apple Podcasts to enjoy this briefing completely ads-free. Today's episode is brought to you exclusively by JamgaMind. When trillion-dollar tech giants are completely redesigning the architecture of human labor and global infrastructure, following social media hype is financial suicide. JamgaMind delivers the human-verified, technical-grade audio forensics the C-suite relies on to navigate these treacherous waters. Visit jamgamind.com. Let's unravel the week.
Imagine you're working at a startup for 3 years. You pour your absolute heart and soul into it.
Right.
And you have these late-night, highly vulnerable Slack conversations, right? You're complaining about management. You're stressing over some massive product launch, maybe making inside jokes with your team when the pressure is just, boiling over.
Because that's what people do.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the company goes under. You get laid off. And a few weeks later, you find out your CEO took all of those servers, all of those private workplace ramps, and just sold them to an AI lab.
Wow.
Yeah, sold them to train the very autonomous agent that is currently applying for your next job. I mean, that isn't a pitch for a dystopian sci-fi script. That actually happened this week.
It's the ultimate commodification of human interaction. And when you sit back and analyze the sheer volume of data being liquidated right now, it paints a pretty chilling picture of where enterprise value is actually moving.
Totally. Which is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at the week of April 12th to April 19th, 2026. And the mission for you, as you listen today, is to put on the hat of a forensic business strategist.
And maybe a bit of a digital rights advocate, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're tracking a massive, frankly terrifying macroeconomic phenomenon that we are calling the Great Reallocation.
A great reallocation.
Right.
And to outline what that actually means, we're looking at trillion-dollar companies that are, aggressively strip mining capital away from human labor and legacy physical hardware.
Right.
And they're taking that capital and just funneling it entirely into compute power, sovereign data reserves, and orbital infrastructure.
It's wild, and we're going to hit this in 4 stages today, right?
Yeah.
First, the white-collar purge. Second, the privacy liquidation, which is that Slack data nightmare we just mentioned.
Yeah, that one's rough.
Then third, geopolitics and infrastructure. Why the real AI war is in orbit and at the bottom of the ocean. And finally, the AI Cold War, looking at the insane boardroom mudslinging happening right now.
Right.
So let's just unpack the mechanics of that reallocation. We have to start with where the capital is being extracted from.
The global middle class.
Exactly. Specifically, the human workforce. Meta is preparing to cut 8,000 jobs next month. I mean, that is roughly 10% of its entire global workforce.
Which is massive.
Right, and Snap is slashing 16% of its workforce, which is about 1,000 people.
Well, look at the explicitly stated reasoning in their SEC filings, though, because it marks a fundamental departure from standard corporate behavior.
How so?
Well, in past cycles, downsizing was always masked in these corporate terms like macroeconomic headwinds or, restructuring for efficiency.
Right, standard PR speak.
Exactly. But Snap explicitly stated they are cutting these 1,000 jobs because algorithmic tools have reduced the need for repetitive work. Yeah, they are expecting to save $500 million annually just from that. And Meta is taking it a step further. They aren't just laying people off, they're actually dissolving entire teams within Reality Labs and moving their top-tier engineers into a newly formed Applied AI organization.
Applied AI. So they're specifically tasked with building autonomous agents.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Agents that write code and execute complex tasks.
Okay, I have to push back on the long-term sustainability of this corporate logic, though. I mean, trillion-dollar companies are firing the middle class to fund coding agents. But the middle class is the demographic that actually has the disposable income to buy the headsets, click the Instagram ads, and subscribe to the services.
Yep.
If you automate away the payroll of the consumer base, you are essentially automating your way out of a market.
Right.
It feels like a massive macroeconomic paradox.
Oh, it absolutely is a paradox on a macro scale. But individual corporations operate on, immediate market incentives, not societal preservation.
Yes.
And Wall Street is violently rewarding this behavior. I mean, eMarketer just released a forecast projecting Meta will overtake Google in global ad revenue by the end of this year, 2026.
Wait, really? Overtake Google?
Yes. They're forecasting Meta hitting $243 billion compared to Google's $239.5 billion. Meta's growth rate is accelerating at 24.1%. That's practically double Google's. And the analysts explicitly credit this to tools like Meta's Advantage Plus.
Okay, let's dissect how Advantage Plus actually works for those listening, because it illustrates the reallocation perfectly. Previously, you would have a human media buyer conceptualizing an ad campaign, right?
Right. Handpicking the demographics?
Yeah, manually A/B testing different images, targeting specific groups, and manually adjusting budgets. Advantage Plus basically bypasses the human entirely. You just feed it raw assets.
Just a logo, a product image, maybe some text.
Exactly. And the algorithm dynamically generates tens of thousands of permutations, predicts user engagement probabilities in real time, and then auto-allocates the budget to the winning variants instantly.
The human intuition of the marketer is completely replaced by predictive statistical modeling. The market doesn't care if Meta fires 8,000 people because the algorithmic automation of ad creation is driving an unprecedented return on ad spend for their clients.
That is brutal for the media buyer.
It is. Capital ruthlessly follows efficiency. They are liquidating the payroll of the human media buyer to purchase more H100 GPUs to run the predictive models faster.
Right. And when trillion-dollar companies are firing 8,000 employees to fund autonomous agents, enterprise leaders must adapt or die. Jamgamine provides the human-verified, technical-grade audio forensics required to map out true ROI and restructure your business safely. Visit djambamind.com.
Because the reality is, you cannot make these structural workforce shifts blindly based on tech blog hype.
No, absolutely not.
You need forensic-level data to understand where your specific operational pipelines can actually be handed over to an algorithm, and where you still absolutely rely on human cognitive flexibility. And, even the human cognitive flexibility that remains on the payroll is being forcibly upgraded. I mean, consider the internal leak from Apple this week.
Oh, the boot camp thing.
Yeah. They are sending nearly 200 of their most senior Siri engineers to a multi-week intensive boot camp. And the sole purpose of this boot camp is to train these highly compensated engineers on how to code using Anthropic's Claude Code and OpenAI's Codex.
Which is fascinating. The mechanics of how an LLM alters a software engineer's daily workflow. We often hear AI writes code, but it's really about context window management, right?
Exactly.
Because when an Apple engineer is building a feature, they historically spent hours writing boilerplate syntax and tracking down bugs. Now, tools like Claude Code can load the entire repository, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, into a massive context window.
Right, the AI reads the whole code base at once.
Yeah, and the engineer just types a natural language prompt, and the AI generates the syntax based on all the dependencies it just read.
But the critical shift is what the human is actually doing there. The human is no longer an artisan typing out functions. The human is a supervisor looking for hallucinations.
Because generative AI is notorious for introducing subtle logical errors.
Exactly. Or referencing libraries that literally don't exist. So the engineer's job transitions from creation to rigorous review and debugging. Apple recognizes that if their engineers don't master this human-machine interface, they will drown in the technical debt created by automated coding agents.
It's almost like transitioning from carving wood by hand with a chisel to operating a complex, automated CNC machine. You still need the operator to program the tool paths and verify the tolerances, but the nature of the labor is utterly transformed.
Right.
The bottleneck is no longer the physical act of typing. It's the speed at which the human can verify the machine's output.
Which naturally leads us to the core vulnerability of this entire system. To run these CNC machines, so to speak, to build these autonomous agents capable of replacing media buyers and accelerating Apple engineers, the models require fuel, data, massive amounts of it. And the foundational models have already ingested the entirety of the public internet. Wikipedia, Reddit, public GitHub repositories, that well is running dry.
So they need private data.
Exactly. To build agents that understand the nuanced, chaotic reality of how a modern business actually operates, they require proprietary, unstructured human data.
And that brings us right back to the horror story we opened with, the privacy liquidation. This desperate hunger for behavioral training data is fueling a phenomenon being called the Asset Hub. So there's this service called Simple Closure, which helps startups wind down operations when they fail.
Right, when they run out of runway.
Yeah, and they just launched a platform to let those failing startups license their defunct workplace data to AI labs. We are talking about internal company emails, meeting transcripts, source code, and most alarmingly, years of private Slack messages.
It's unbelievable.
Startups are selling this cash for hundreds of thousands of dollars to recoup losses for their investors.
Now, Simple Closure insists they are utilizing automated scrubbing tools to remove personally identifiable information, or PII. Things like social security numbers, names, and direct email addresses.
Sure, they claim it's anonymous.
But digital rights advocates are violently pushing back on this because the concept of anonymization in the era of large language models is basically a statistical myth.
Yeah, let's break down the mechanics of why PII scrubbing fails on conversational data. It comes down to a field called stylometry.
Stylometry, right.
Let's say my name is scrubbed from a data set, but in my Slack messages, I have a habit of using a double dash instead of a semicolon. I frequently use the phrase, let's circle back, and I always misspell the word definitely.
Right, you leave a linguistic fingerprint.
Exactly. When you combine my unique linguistic fingerprint with the specific technical jargon of my department and the timestamps of when I usually log online, I'm uniquely identifiable within a vector database. You don't need my name. My conversational cadence is my signature.
It's corporate grave robbing. Furthermore, consider what the AI companies are actually buying here. They aren't buying the data to learn facts. They are buying the data to learn human behavior under pressure.
Right, the emotional data.
Yes. They want to train enterprise agents on how a team negotiates a missed deadline, or how a manager de-escalates a conflict between two engineers, or how a sales team strategizes a pivot. That data was generated by employees under the strict legal and psychological presumption of internal corporate privacy.
It fundamentally violates the social contract of the workplace. We are turning workplace stress and private project management into liquid capital, and it really highlights a broader market signal. The acquisition of training data now supersedes almost all other legal and ethical considerations.
Oh, without a doubt.
Just look at the default judgment handed down this week to Spotify and the three major music labels, Universal, Warner, and Sony. They won a $322 million judgment against a pirate activist group called Anna's Archive.
Right. And Anna's Archive openly scraped 86 million copyrighted songs from Spotify's platform to distribute them, effectively building the ultimate training corpus for audio generation models.
Yep.
The judge awarded the massive penalty and a permanent injunction, but the underlying reality of the digital infrastructure makes enforcing that ruling functionally impossible.
Because the operators are completely unknown,
Yeah.
they utilize decentralized torrent networks and constantly rotate offshore domain names. They aren't running a traditional centralized server rack that the FBI can just walk in and unplug.
The parallel between Anna's Archive and the Asset Hub phenomenon is striking. Whether it is pirating 86 million songs in violation of global copyright law, or liquidating a failed startup's private Slack chats in violation of basic employee privacy, the systemic behavior is exactly the same.
The models demand data.
The models demand data, and the market will invent whatever legal loophole, gray area, or decentralized distribution method is necessary to feed them.
And here is the deeply cynical loop of this entire economy. As our digital footprints are being scraped and liquidated to train machines to act, write, and speak exactly like us, we are simultaneously being subjected to an aggressive new wave of biometric checkpoints to prove we aren't the very machines we helped train.
It's wild. The World Project.
Yeah, Sam Altman's World Project, which used to be WorldCoin, just announced massive enterprise partnerships this week with Zoom, Tinder, and DocuSign.
They are rolling out proof of human integration. Tinder is adding World ID emblems to profiles globally, requiring users to verify their biological humanity before interacting.
Which means scanning your iris or something similar.
And Ticketmaster is integrating their Concert Kit feature, allowing artists to restrict ticket sales exclusively to World ID verified humans to prevent scalping bots from overwhelming the system.
It is a staggering geopolitical irony. The AI industry, championed by figures like Altman, builds the generative models that make bots indistinguishable from humans. They flood the internet with these synthetic identities. And then their solution to the problem they created is to require you to cryptographically verify your biological identity just to join a Zoom call, sign a contract, or swipe on a dating app.
It creates a closed-loop monopoly on trust.
Exactly. We provide the conversational data, we lose the white-collar job, and then we have to biometrically scan ourselves to prove we still have the right to participate in the digital economy.
But the software, the data, the biometric scanners, none of it exists in a vacuum. It all relies on highly fragile physical supply chains. And while the West is obsessing over asset hubs and Tinder verification, the actual bedrock of this technology is facing a severe structural threat. We are witnessing the escalation of a compute Cold War.
The compute Cold War. Let's shift our forensic lens to the hardware and infrastructure, starting with the new AI Index report from Stanford University that dropped this week.
This was a big deal.
Massive. The data confirms a reality that Washington has been dreading. China has completely erased the United States' lead in artificial intelligence capabilities. The benchmark testing shows models from both nations constantly trading the #1 spot.
And the transparency era is completely dead. Over 90% of frontier models are coming from private labs that flat out refuse to disclose their dataset sizes, parameter counts, or training durations.
Which means no one actually knows how powerful the newest models are until they drop.
Right. And the parity in software capability is deeply alarming for U.S. strategists, but the real panic is unfolding at the silicon layer. Listen to NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang's recent interview on the Dwarkish podcast.
I heard that. He was remarkably blunt.
Very blunt. He explicitly warned that it would be a, quote, horrible outcome for the United States if DeepSeek, which is one of China's premier AI labs, optimizes its upcoming V4 model for Huawei's Ascend 950 PR processors instead of utilizing American hardware.
We really need to dive into the mechanism of why this specific software-hardware divorce is so catastrophic for U.S. leverage. DeepSeek isn't just buying different chips. They are fundamentally rewriting their core code to work natively with Huawei's Canon software framework.
Right, actively moving away from NVIDIA's CDA ecosystem.
To understand the stakes, you have to understand CDA. CDA is essentially the programming language that allows software to talk to NVIDIA's GPUs. Over the last 15 years, developers worldwide have built millions of lines of highly optimized C++ code, specific math libraries, and parallel processing kernels exclusively on CDA.
It basically became the default operating system for AI.
Exactly. Analysts refer to CDA as America's second layer of control. Even if a foreign entity manages to smuggle physical GPUs past export controls, they are still reliant on the American software ecosystem to run them efficiently.
But if DeepSeek successfully translates those complex tensor calculations and matrix multiplications to run directly on Huawei's framework,
the moat evaporates.
The moat is gone. If they pull this off, they demonstrate to the global market that highly competitive frontier-level AI can be built and deployed without a single piece of American silicon or software in the pipeline. The geopolitical leverage the U.S. holds via export bans vanishes overnight.
Listen, trying to navigate this massive shift in labor, data privacy, and geopolitical hardware supply chains based on Twitter hype is corporate malpractice. Stop collecting shiny beta apps and start deploying actual infrastructure. ADN has audited the market for the AI Unraveled community, Head over to djamgamemine.com/toolkit for the AI Executive Toolkit. This is a private, forensic-vetted stack featuring tools like Chatbase and 11 Labs enterprise-grade weapons designed to drive actual governed ROI. You cannot survive this reallocation without verified tools.
And verified tools require secure transmission because generating the compute is only half the battle, right? Transmitting the data across the globe is where the physical vulnerabilities are suddenly becoming terrifyingly real.
Like the Amazon deal.
Exactly. Amazon just shocked the market by purchasing a satellite company called Globalstar for $11.5 billion, paying $90 a share.
But Amazon already has its own low Earth orbit project, Project Kuiper, right? Now rebranded as LEO. So why drop nearly $12 billion to acquire a rival network? Are satellites the new shipping lanes?
Well, to understand the astronomical capital expenditure of $11.5 billion in space, you have to look at the physical vulnerabilities on Earth, specifically at the bottom of the ocean. A Chinese research vessel recently tested a highly specialized deep-sea device designed for one specific purpose:
Cutting submarine data cables.
the engineering on this device is incredibly precise. It operates at depths of over 13,000 feet, which means it has to withstand crushing hydrostatic pressure.
Right, normal engines would just fail. Right, so instead of a traditional electric motor, it uses an electrohydrostatic actuator. It uses pressurized fluid to drive a diamond-coated grinding wheel. It is specifically calibrated to slice through the heavy steel wire, rubber insulation, and polymer armor that protects the internet subsea backbone.
And you have to realize the global economy, cloud computing, massive AI data transfers, it all relies almost entirely on these thousands of miles of fiber optic cables resting on the ocean floor. We are seeing a surge in patents filed by Chinese military and civilian organizations for deep-sea trenching and cable cutting tools.
If those cables are severed, whether intentionally during a conflict or just accidentally by a dragging anchor, international data flow halts. Cloud clusters on different continents literally cannot sync.
So reliance on the ocean floor is a massive geopolitical liability, but reliance on low Earth orbit has its own unique set of corporate liabilities. Let's look at the second vulnerability point from this week.
The Starlink outage. Yeah. Internal Navy documents revealed that a global Starlink outage last August completely knocked out communications for 24 unmanned U.S. Navy vessels during a critical drone test off the California coast.
Wow. And the vessels rely on Starlink's phased array antennas to receive high-bandwidth steering and control data. So when the network experienced an anomaly, the test was paralyzed for nearly an hour.
Right, and the Pentagon is waking up to the extreme danger of depending heavily on a single corporate entity, SpaceX, which currently holds a near monopoly on low Earth orbit broadband.
And Elon Musk is actively trying to verticalize his control even further. His team just commanded chip-making equipment suppliers, companies like Applied Materials, to move at quote-unquote light speed to build out the Terafab project.
Terafab.
Yeah, Terafab is a joint venture between Tesla and SpaceX aimed at manufacturing their own custom silicon by 2029. Musk intends to own the entire pipeline, from the raw silicon design to the physical data centers to the rockets launching the satellites to the orbital transmission network. So when you synthesize the threat of subsea cable severing and the reality of Musk's vertical monopoly, Amazon's $11.5 billion acquisition becomes entirely logical. Amazon Web Services is the backbone of the global internet. They cannot allow their cloud infrastructure to be held hostage by a Chinese deep-sea cutter, nor can they rely on their direct competitor Elon Musk to transmit their data from orbit.
They're buying Globalstar to build sovereign infrastructure. They're guaranteeing their data has a secure proprietary path from the server farm to the end user.
Exactly. But dropping billions on satellite networks, custom silicon, and server farms creates an immense gravitational pull on corporate balance sheets. These companies have to justify this capital expenditure to Wall Street.
Which brings us to our final arena, the AI Cold War. The boardroom drama and financial cracking we're witnessing right now. The pressure to prove profitability before upcoming IPOs is absolutely tearing the facades off the top AI labs.
The tension is, it's manifesting as a public blood feud between OpenAI and Anthropic. A highly sensitive internal memo from OpenAI's chief revenue officer, Denise Dresser, leaked to the press this week.
Oh man, that memo.
In it, she aggressively accuses Anthropic of utilizing deceptive accounting methodologies. She's claiming they're overstating their $30 billion run rate by a staggering $8 billion.
Let's really analyze the mechanics of this accusation, because it exposes how valuations are engineered in the cloud era. The debate centers on gross versus net accounting, Anthropic relies heavily on distributing its models through cloud partners like Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud.
Right.
Let's say an enterprise customer pays AWS $100 to access Anthropic's Claude model. AWS keeps $20 for the compute costs, and Anthropic gets $80.
And according to Dresser's accusation, Anthropic is booking that entire $100 as top-line gross revenue, even though they only see $80. OpenAI, conversely, claims they use net reporting for their Microsoft Azure sales, only booking the actual cash they receive.
But wait, I have to interject here, because from a purely legal standpoint, both gross and net accounting methodologies can comply with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles under specific contract structures. OpenAI isn't accusing Anthropic of a crime. They're throwing mud over accounting principles to control the narrative. Why does that $20 discrepancy matter so much?
It matters because of valuation multiples. We are in the pre-IPO window. Tech companies are valued based on multiples of their revenue run rate. If the market is valuing an AI lab at 50 times its revenue, that $20 discrepancy isn't just $20.
It's huge.
It artificially inflates the company's theoretical valuation by $1,000 for every single transaction. OpenAI is terrified that Anthropic is engineering a massive valuation advantage right before they both try to tap the public markets for liquidity.
And the data shows OpenAI has a legitimate reason to be terrified. The RAMP corporate card data released this week tracks actual enterprise spending. It shows Anthropic aggressively eating into OpenAI's enterprise market share.
Yeah, the numbers are shifting.
Anthropic now commands 30.6% of enterprise AI paying customers, compared to OpenAI's 35.2%. If the current trajectory holds, the projections indicate Anthropic will cross over and officially dethrone OpenAI in the enterprise sector within 2 months.
And Dresser's leaked memo actually highlights the exact structural vulnerability causing this. She admitted OpenAI has, quote, staggering inbound demand, but she placed the blame for their market share bleed squarely on their exclusive partnership with Microsoft.
Because OpenAI is contractually tethered to Microsoft's Azure cloud, they are entirely locked out of alternative distribution platforms like Amazon's Bedrock.
Right, whereas Anthropic is platform agnostic, they are dominating enterprise deployment precisely because they're available wherever the enterprise already stores its data.
So OpenAI's chief revenue officer is essentially telling her team, our biggest competitor is artificially inflating their numbers, but also our foundational deal with Microsoft is legally preventing us from actually competing with them. That is a brutal internal contradiction.
Very brutal.
And while the executive team points fingers over cloud contracts, the investor class is starting to panic about the stability of the leadership, specifically Sam Altman.
The founder's dilemma is playing out in real time. OpenAI investors are openly questioning to the financial press whether Altman possesses the operational focus necessary to shepherd the company through an IPO. The sources indicate severe frustration because Altman's attention is heavily bifurcated.
Bifurcated is putting it mildly. I mean, he is actively asking the OpenAI board to funnel capital into Helion Energy, a nuclear fusion startup he has a major personal stake in.
Yeah.
He's pushing the company to back Stoke Space, a rocket manufacturer, even floating the idea of an outright acquisition.
Right.
He wants to build fusion reactors and orbital rockets, while his core software product is losing market share to Anthropic.
The capital reallocation requires laser-focused execution. Investors don't want Philosopher King pursuing a sci-fi vision of the future. They want a CEO who can stabilize enterprise churn. This is why the name Brett Taylor keeps surfacing in the press.
Former co-CEO of Salesforce.
Exactly, and the current OpenAI board chair. He represents stability, traditional enterprise software pedigree, and a track record of focusing on one operational role at a time. The tension between preparing for a rigorous public offering and maintaining the aura of a visionary founder is really reaching a breaking point.
And to distract from this internal friction, both labs are engaging in an incredibly aggressive, verticalized product war. General-purpose chatbots are no longer sufficient to justify a $100 billion valuation. They have to prove they can dominate specific, high-margin industries.
Like design, look at Anthropic launching Claude Design this week. It is a direct, targeted assassination attempt on design software giants like Figma, Adobe, and Canva.
The mechanics of Claude Design are genuinely impressive. A user can bypass the entire graphic design process. Through complex text prompts, the Claude Opus 4.7 model generates fully interactive prototypes, vector-based visual designs, and dynamic slide decks.
But the corporate theater surrounding this launch is what makes it so aggressive. Anthropic's chief product officer, Mike Rieger, resigned from his seat on Figma's board of directors on April 14th. Literally days later, Anthropic launches a product explicitly engineered to destroy Figma's core business model.
Wow. That is boardroom warfare. And OpenAI is launching equivalent strikes in the life sciences sector. They just previewed GPT Rosalind, a model custom-built for computational biology to accelerate drug discovery. We have to understand how different this is from ChatGPT writing an email.
Oh, it's completely different.
GPT Rosalind doesn't process English text. It treats complex amino acid sequences and molecular structures as its primary tokens. It simulates protein folding and predicts molecular binding affinities natively.
It is a direct response to Amazon Web Services launching Amazon Biodiscovery this week. AWS is heavily marketing their tool to pharmaceutical researchers to uncover new drug molecules, carefully framing it as a tool to augment computational biologists rather than replace them. The race to monetize the trillion-dollar healthcare and pharma verticals is arguably the highest stakes front in the product war.
And of course, the cybersecurity arms race. OpenAI dropped GPT 5.4 Cyber to a select group of vetted security partners. It is specifically trained to ingest massive software repositories and identify zero-day vulnerabilities.
Which occurred just a week after Anthropic had to actively restrict access to its Claude Mythos preview because of severe concerns regarding cyber misuse by bad actors.
The overarching narrative here is the desperation to justify the bubble. They are weaponizing these models for enterprise verticals, design, pharmacology, cybersecurity, because the foundational costs of the compute Cold War are too massive to sustain otherwise. And when the pressure to perform is this high, the broader market behavior becomes entirely unhinged.
Which brings us to the most absurd yet perfectly illustrative data point of the week. Allbirds,
The shoe company.
the company famous for making those comfortable wool sneakers that venture capitalists wear around Silicon Valley. They sold their shoe brand for $39 million. They subsequently rebranded the entire corporate entity to Newbird AI.
Keyword AI.
It is a phenomenal example of market froth. A wool sneaker company pivoted its entire business model to become a, and I quote the press release here, GPU as a service and AI-native cloud solutions provider. They promised to lease server space to startups.
And the market reaction. Their stock price surged 373% almost instantly.
It perfectly mirrors the cryptocurrency mania of late 2017. Remember when the Long Island Iced Tea Corporation simply changed its name to Long Blockchain Corp and saw its stock spike by nearly 300%, despite having absolutely nothing to do with cryptographic ledgers?
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
When a failing shoe company can quadruple its market capitalization simply by stapling the letters AI to its name and promising to buy graphics cards, you know the reallocation of capital has reached a fever pitch. It is the definition of an irrational bubble.
Newbird AI. From ethically sourced wool to leasing compute. Listen, let's synthesize this massive forensic autopsy for you. The thesis of the Great Reallocation is visible in every single data point we explored today. You are watching real, tangible wealth flow directly out of the global middle class, evidenced by the 8,000 human jobs liquidated at Meta to fund autonomous ad algorithms.
Exactly.
You are watching the fundamental erosion of workplace privacy as startups utilize asset hubs to sell your vulnerable late-night Slack complaints to build the very models replacing those jobs.
And you are witnessing the physical reality of the compute Cold War, the geopolitical panic over deep-sea cutters threatening the internet's subsea backbone, pushing companies like Amazon to spend $11.5 billion on sovereign satellite networks just to escape Elon Musk's orbital monopoly and China's hardware parity. All of this infrastructure requires capital, which places immense pressure on OpenAI and Anthropic to engineer their accounting, launch vertical killing products, and fight over enterprise market share before the IPO window closes.
It is a profound structural remaking of the economy. But understanding these mechanisms, knowing exactly how Xantage Plus bypasses a media buyer, or why the Can-An framework threatens CUDA, is how you navigate it without being swept away.
That's why we do this.
Exactly. Which brings me to a final provocative detail for you to turn over in your mind long after we sign off. We analyze World's integration with Tinder and Zoom, forcing us to utilize zero-knowledge biometric proofs just to verify our human existence online. And we analyze the startups selling your highly specific stylometric conversational data to train these behavioral models.
Right, your linguistic fingerprint.
Right. So consider this unmentioned development from Meta this week. Meta is currently finalizing a photorealistic 3D generative AI clone of Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah, it has been extensively trained on thousands of hours of his unique vocal cadence, his specific micro-expressions, and his strategic reasoning. The goal is for employees to interact with this clone and receive high-level strategic feedback when the real CEO is unavailable.
Unbelievable.
So here's the question you have to ask yourself. If these models are continuously ingesting our liquidated, private communications, and they are learning precisely how we structure a sentence, how we hesitate, how we deflect blame under pressure, will the algorithm eventually know how to impersonate us with a higher degree of fidelity than we have the ability to biometrically verify ourselves?
That is a chilling thought.
And if Meta is building a hyper-realistic digital clone of their CEO to interact with employees today, exactly how long until your company builds a clone of you to perform your job?
It is a terrifying paradox of identity and labor. Deepening your understanding of the mechanisms driving this shift is your only defense against it. Thank you for diving into the source material with us today.
Subscribe to AI Unraveled on Apple Podcasts to always listen completely, ads-free. Keep exploring the mechanisms, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
That concludes our weekly forensic rundown. The strategic signal for this week is reallocation. We are witnessing a massive transfer of capital. The money that used to pay the salaries of the tech middle class is now being used to fund autonomous coding agents at Meta and Snap. The private messages you sent on Slack 3 years ago are being liquidated by bankrupt startups to feed the next generation of models. And tech giants are buying up satellites by the billions to ensure their algorithms never go offline. The machine is feeding itself, and if you don't own your own infrastructure, you are no longer part of the equation. If you want to survive this restructuring, you need the right tools. Head over to djamgarmind.com/toolkit for my AI Executive Toolkit. I've audited the market to bring you a vetted implementation stack to deploy real infrastructure today. And as a special bonus for the AI Unraveled community, I have exclusive discount codes for Google Workspace and my personal pro apps. Just send me an email at etienne_numen@djamgarmind.com and I'll send them your way. This episode was made possible exclusively by djamgarmind. Hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts to enjoy this briefing completely ads-free. I am Etienne Numen. Stay sharp and keep unraveling the future. And before you go, if your company is building the tools that power the workflows we talked about today, I'd love to showcase them to this audience. We don't just run ads, we build technical simulations that prove your value. Let's build something together. Visit jamgarmind.com/partners to get started. Until next time, keep building.